Hello. Thank you very much for BASF for inviting me here, and I do hope you can understand my Lincolnshire accent. Yesterday, I was at home giving a talk on carbon, and at 3 o'clock this morning, I was on a plane at Lithuania, parked on a runway, thinking we might not get here. We made it. I haven't had a lot of sleep, so apologies if I make mistakes. This is us. This is what I do. I own most of the farm I look after. I look after other people's farms. And I am a tenant on a 120-hectare block. I have mainly high clay content soils, which proves its own challenges from time to time. The splodge is me. That's where I am. Don't know whether laser works or not, but that's me. That's where I am in context of the UK. And when the lady before put up a slide containing the EU, and the UK's not there anymore, that was quite something for me, because for several decades we've been there beside you guys. We have a very wide and diverse rotation. It includes wheat, barley, oats. This is when the interpreter gets a bit panicky. Rye, canary seed. We grow winter and spring varieties of both, and I do a lot of foraging for an anaerobic digestion plant. As you can see there, 5.5% of my farm is dedicated to environmental measures, and I'll go on to explain in a minute why that is important to me, especially now we, the UK, have left the EU, and I need to supplement my income from lack of subsidies. The other thing is we grow miscanthus, which I'm about to come on to, but the environmental areas look something like that. So here, nearest the camera, is bees. It's an environmental area dedicated to bees, and in the background is an area of the same field dedicated to birds. So naturally enough, we call it our birds and bee field. When my dog, my spaniel, runs through this, there is a telegraph pole in the distance. You can just see it. That's where all the birds, because it's hanging wires, that's where all the birds run to when my dog runs through it. And that's why the environmental area is where it is. It's a smaller field on my farm. It's one that isn't that productive, and so therefore I've set it aside for wildlife. This is miscanthus, otherwise known as elephant grass. And as you can see from the deer there, basically, you could hide an elephant in it. That's why it's called elephant grass. It is very, very tall, perennial grass, planted once and left there for 20 to 25 years, harvested every single year. It powers power stations, and I'll go through the process now. But we have a big push in the UK for renewable energy. And they provided us with a grant to plant this crop. And for 25 years, I will be providing bales that will be burnt in a power station 10 fields further this way in the photograph. It was cut just before I left for Latvia. It is foraged, but left in a heap, a trail, as you can see in the foreground. It is probably left down for about 6 weeks, roughly, and it looks like bamboo canes. And it can be left out in snow and rain, and the water just runs through it, and it doesn't hold moisture. 6 weeks later, it will be baled, and this is the only part of the process I do. I take the bales off the field and put them in a shed, because they could get wet at this point. And moisture is important to the power plant, because they can burn it more efficiently when it's dry. And they actually mix it in with straw, normal wheat and barley straw, and they mix the two together to create a substance that they generate steam from by burning to run a turbine to heat water. As I say, that's the only part of the process I do, and then they get moved by lorries 10 fields this way. I can see it from my house, the power plant. Roughly 2 weeks later, maybe 3, depending on the season, it'll start growing again. And it always panics me that there's little stripes in it and gaps in it. But it will come back. It will yield 13 tons per hectare. And every year I get paid a little bit more for it because it's retail price indexed. It goes up every year, nearly every year. So, sustainability and what it means to my farm. Fingers crossed at this point. This is November on my farm in a nearly typical year. Like you, I'm facing pressures from the environmental people. One of their discussions with me is, your farm's like that every year. Why don't you bother giving up? Put it all down to biodiversity, to wildlife and people, and give up. How do I explain that to my children, that I've dedicated the whole farm? I think there should be a joined-up approach, not one or the other. We are all in this room, presumably, food producers. We feed people around the world. I also provide them with heat and energy that powers their homes. That is an important message that we need to get out there. I said I am high clay soils. When my soils dry out, they shrink. And when they shrink, my daughter's arm, she's 12, she can get her arm all the way down to her shoulder blades on my soils. This is April. You go from flooding in November to that in April, maybe May. I need to make my soils work with that. That's a close-up of my soil now. It's like a big sponge. And it's not artificially made. That is me leaving the soil to do its job for me. I used to plough. I used to do a lot of work. I'm going to show you in a picture in a minute why I don't plough anymore. But that's what I'm aiming for, a nice mixture of straw, roots, and the soil itself. The other challenge I have, which I think some of you may know, that haze in the background there is blackgrass. Blackgrass is a real problem for us in the UK. If I grow winter crops, it grows in the winter. If I grow spring crops, it learns to germinate in the spring. If I grow tall crops, it learns to grow tall. And if I grow short crops, it tends to perk itself out the top of the... It works against me all the time. So I cannot plant early because of that. If any of you want to know, I could bring you some if you want some. But it's what I have to work with my soil type. I think this might take a bit of explaining. We left the EU, UK left the EU in 2016, I think we voted to leave. My country doesn't know what it's doing at the moment, it doesn't have a clue. But what it does say is that I'm going to get my subsidy, this bar here, this bar, is going to go down for the next few years. And in 4 years' time, I won't have any subsidy at all. The little bar on the far side, I don't know how this will work, is the environmental measures I've had to add in to try and get some money back. We seem to have lost the interest in food in my country, and it's all about environmental measures. So when they started telling me, imagine 10's 100%. So in 2020, it started to come off. So that's when I added an environmental scheme onto that. This year, in my government's wisdom, they've added on SFI, Sustainable Farming Incentive. They want to encourage us to do sustainable farming practices, such as direct drilling, such as cover cropping, and they will pay us to do that. This year will be the first year of that, but even next year, I'm never going to get back to there. I'm never going to get back to 2020. So I have to farm differently. I have to find a way of farming and making my family money. I have two drills. No, I don't. I have 3 or 4 drills, but I have 2 main drills. A Vardestat, everybody will, you all know Vardestat drills? I have a Vardestat drill, and I have this drill. It's unique to our country, I think. And close up here, that's your seeding tine, and that's a closing tine. And you go through and it presses in on the side of a wall. It makes things completely different. Government is paying us, funding us, to have those sort of drills on the farm at the moment. But, as Martin's talked about earlier, there are problems. You can't go straight from ploughing to that without issues going forward. What he also mentioned, he called it catch cropping, same thing, cover cropping. So when you disturb the soil, whenever I disturb the soil, I either apologize to her, which I'll explain later, or I will plant a crop when I disturb the soil. That way, I'm always feeding the microbes in the soil. She's smiling, she's still happy. How biodiversity fits for me. The black outline is an 11-hectare field. Newstead Priory over there is a wedding venue. Lots of people drive past this field every year looking at my field. I took this on as a tenant thinking I can change the world, I can do everything. First year I cropped that, the black hashed area netted me nothing. There was nothing in it. It flooded. It was horrible. The rest of the field, the whole field was cropped with wheat, but that hashed area got me nothing. I did 8 tonnes per hectare. Take the 2 hectares out of that cropping, and my government will give me 500, 600 pounds a hectare to plant cover crops in there, wildlife mixes that you've seen before. Wildlife mixes such as that. Stuff for birds and bees, stuff that is alive with the little bugs that maybe aren't in the rest of the fields. The rest of that field, when we cropped it again, the rectangle with wheat delivered 10 tonnes per hectare. I was getting more out of the field by separating off bits of it. We always have bits of our field that don't do as well as other parts. So why not move some of it to the wildlife? That's what they're encouraging in our country. I think, again, Martin's, and something the EU would like you guys to do is buffering. So productive crop on the far side and an area dedicated to wildlife next to a hedgerow or a watercourse. A big, wide, 24-metre margin. You walk in that in July, it's absolutely alive with bees and insects. It's the bit of my farm that puts a smile on my face. It really makes me happy to see wildflowers and insects, and they get paid for it. There is a watercourse next door to that. That's just a smaller version of the same thing. The problem I do have is if you do that across a lot of my farm, people start walking in it, and then you get cyclists on it, then you get horses, and we've even known to have vehicles crossing it. So I can only do it in certain areas. It can cause as much problem as it benefits me. Interesting earlier, the lady down here, forgive me, I forgot her name, from the Institute of Riga, was talking about energy production and AD plants, anaerobic digestion, methane, production of methane. She's happy again. So I have one of those on my doorstep. And what it actually is helps me on my farm. That's forage barley, but it also allows me to take blackgrass off the farm at the same time. If I get into a real mess and the blackgrass starts to outcompete my crops, I can send a forager in there and it will literally walk the problem off my farm. Interestingly, again, Martin's, I put a catch crop in after that barley. So my barley tends to come off in June. From June to September, the fields are bare. There is nothing on them. So why don't you plant a crop into it? That's what they all want you to do. That's keep your soils covered at all times. Stunningly beautiful. That was on Facebook pages. Dog walkers were talking to me about it. I'd got a flow of information, a conversation going between me and the people around me. What I needed to learn was it makes your soils wetter underneath. How do you manage that to get another crop into it? We have to learn how to do these new things and do things in new ways. It just carried on flowering. It was beautiful. I couldn't go in there and chop that down and spray it off. Everybody would have had a fit in my village. They'd have told me off. But if you leave it too long, it starts seeding and you get problems in your crop from seeds that you don't really want, and they start growing in the crop. And it wet underneath. I couldn't plant a crop into that last year. It was the year after, it was too big. Maize for methane, for biodigesting. That's why you probably don't do it. This was while I was still ploughing. When you grow maize, you have to plough, don't you? Forager got stuck there. He sank down to the bottom of the plough pan. We pulled him out, and behind us here where we stood was another field that had been minimum tilled. And we actually got that harvested because it was a more solid soil structure. This was soft. We'd created an artificial mix that the soil type didn't want. We don't do that in our country. We had to do that year. That is combining that maize crop when we couldn't get it harvested. We had to find another solution. So, me, being me and doing things slightly differently, why don't I direct drill maize? Ploughing didn't work, minimum till was good, but why don't I go all the way to direct drilling it? Hang on, they're panicking. Are they okay? Okay. So why don't I try direct drilling it? We actually strip tilled a strip and planted a bit of cover crop in the middle, and then direct drilled straight into it. It worked. What you can't see, though, is the purpling on the plant edges. My soils open up when they get dry. Those plants, when it got to May, were literally hanging on. They had nothing to work against. They had nothing, no root structure, nothing to it. It takes a long time, 4 or 5 years, to get your soil into something that you're a bit happier with. This is 4 years later now. This is this year. That was oilseed rape. The oilseed rape volunteers were good enough as a soil cover on their own to create a protection from my soil to keep it moist, but also stop it from being hit by rain and the sun. And I drilled straight into that with a radiostat, then killed the oilseed rape off. And I'm left with what I call soil armour, and what is now a very, very good crop of wheat, which actually BASF have a trial in, but that's not part of the... What can I do that can make a difference? Measure to manage. Soil organic matter. If I can increase the soil organic matter in my soil by 0.1%, I can take 9 tons, roughly 9 tons, of carbon dioxide out of the air, and I can put 2.5 tons of carbon in the soil. But how do you know you're doing that without measuring your soil organic matters? The second one is carbon use efficiency. I use manures, compost, digestate. But the single best way of increasing soil organic matter is with plants, living plants. This will really test them. Root exudates from that plant. Add soil organic matter to the microbes in the soil in a form they readily digest. And it's the quickest way of increasing your carbon is to put living roots in your soil for as long as possible. The other thing is when you've got a ton of wheat in a bar like that, that's your carbon footprint. half that carbon footprint is dedicated to nitrogen and the manufacture of nitrogen. So we need to use that more efficiently, so therefore, as Martin's was doing, using less. And it comes down to that. I grow milling wheat, bread-making wheat on my farm. I was putting 240 kilos of nitrogen on every hectare. But I know I was doing it at 65% efficiency. That's the equivalent of 156 kilos if I was to use it at 100% efficiency. But that creates its own problems. Because when you're using it efficiently, it gets into your plant quicker and can scorch the plant. I use liquid UAN, liquid nitrogen. But what I do, that one there, is molasses. I wrap my nitrogen in carbon. And what that does is create a bigger molecule that goes into your plant slower and gets used more efficiently within your plant. If you put soil-applied nitrogen on anything, it can disappear. If you're using urea, it can disappear up. If you're using nitrate, it can go down into the watercourses. By using foliar urea on the plant later on in the season and wrapping it in carbon, you can use your nitrogen much more efficiently. And I've managed to grow my milling wheat last year 10.5 tonnes per hectare using just 218 kilos to make full spec milling wheat. And I know my efficiency has increased to 85%. The other containers are, I can't say hydrolysate, they won't understand it, fish. That's liquid fish. And you mix liquid fish with molasses and humic acids, and I do a biostimulant, and that's how I apologize to my soils. Whenever I disturb them, I put that on my soils, so that instead of the microbes eating the carbon and putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, they'll eat on the cocktail I've given them, and it will go down, and I don't lose carbon dioxide in my soil. That was my oilseed rape crop last year. That field did 3.63 tonnes per hectare, and I only applied 42 kilos of nitrogen to it. That's about as efficient, that's over 100% efficiency of nitrogen use. I'm really proud that I could do that. But we were talking about precisions and technology, and very first introduction this morning showed you a picture of that. You measure your nitrogen as you're going through the season. So I know what's in my soil, I'll measure that. I will tissue test during the growing season. When I get to flag leaf stage, big crop just before the ear comes out, I'll measure it with the end tester, and it will tell me any additional amount I need to put on. And if necessary, I'll go on with foliar. I'll then measure the grain at the end of the season and put all the calculations in, and it will come up with my efficiency total. The other thing on my farm is we all like big, shiny machinery. I like big, shiny machinery. And now I'm moving my soil less, I don't have so much big, shiny machinery. This one here is mine, but I don't own it. I hire it in every year. We only use a combine for 6 weeks of the year. Why do we feel the need to own it? I don't understand why anybody feels the need to own a machine for that long. I hire mine in. That's my neighbour's next door. He bought his 14 years ago. His repair bills are getting quite high now. Mine's all in at the start of the year. I know exactly what I'm paying. They will come, they will service it, they will get me a machine if it breaks down. I have no depreciation on my accounts. There is nothing there to write down. It is gone. And therefore, I'm more efficient with my money. I think I've seen this. I don't know whether Latvia does this. I've soil tested every single with a magnet. Electroconductivity is what it is. And it's basically a magnet that runs across my field, measuring resistance and tells me what soil types and where they are on my farm. If you look at the big field here, I can vary the seed rate depending on the soil type. Because on the lighter soil type, you probably need a bit more seed, and on the heavy soil type, you probably need a little bit less. And so I vary it going through the year. As I plant it, sorry, apologies, as I plant it. And that makes the plant stand more even. And then I do use satellite imagery then to measure. You want that quite even. You want lots of blues and greens. That tells you you've got your plant stand right in the first place, and you can feed the whole field exactly the same without having to use expensive technology that feeds sensors. This is where I won my sustainability award. This is what made me the difference between me and the next guy. I bring 300, 350 school kids onto my farm every year and tell them what I'm doing. I put a table out in front of them and put everything that I produce on my farm on that table. And then challenge them, what do you eat that doesn't come from a farm? I haven't been beaten yet. Me, produce food that people eat. And there is a little loss in appreciation between us and the general public. My farm used to, the labour for my farm used to come from the village. We no longer have staff that live in the village. We don't have a connection with the village anymore. They just walk on my fields, look at my wildlife, and tell me off for being a nasty farmer. I'm trying to get to the school kids now and teach them what I'm doing. What it does is it educates the teachers as well. The teachers have a big influence on what their kids believe. And when you can tell your story and tell them where your food comes from, something in there clicks with the kids. And in our country, a lot of the kids come from towns, what I call concrete jungles. Some of them don't even see grass anymore. And some of the refugees that come to our country eat leaves because that's how they used to live. You show them biodiversity, you show them flowers, you show them the insects that are on those flowers. They really do appreciate then what you're trying to do. I was told to include this slide. There's a lady in our country called Aliona. She works for BASF. She comes from Moldova. That's Christmas. That's dinner. Like you've done. You tell the kids that, they chuckle. You have another connection with the kids. They're 3 years old. Obviously, they're not Christmas dinner. But it's a connection I've made with the kids. It doesn't have to be cows. It doesn't have to be sheep. But we can then show them that later. COVID hit. We couldn't bring the kids onto the farm anymore. So my wife, who's much cleverer than I am, created a box and sent it to the kids. We couldn't do that on our own, so we worked with a charity partner called the Country Trust. And between us, we've devised a way of showing them my farm, your farm, it doesn't have to be my farm, what I do in a kit form. And you can reach out to them when they're at school. And you can even then FaceTime them, Facebook them. You can then have an interaction with them down and explain what you're doing. And yes, you still get how much do you earn? How long do you work? And most of those is I work a hell of a lot of hours and I don't earn a lot. But you get a connection with them. I work with several companies now. That's the watercourse you saw at the start, the one that was overflooding, overtopping. It's the River Ancombe. It's a river that runs through my farm. That is a water abstraction plant. It's where my local water company takes its water from, has to clean it up because of what I've done on my farm, to bring it back in my tap, which is about here in this picture. What I do on my farm affects everybody else and ultimately affects what my kids drink. They used to sample from that bridge every month, sample the water quality, and they'd look at my office because I look at them, and they'd come visit me and go, what are you doing? And I've challenged them, I work with them, I say, what are you finding? Some of the chemistry I use on my farm are very simple to measure, and I want to mention a chemical active. It's called bentazone that BASF make. It's very simple to deal with. I put a drip tray, just a tray, underneath where I fill up the sprayer and catch any splashes from it. And that way, I'm not then polluting anything else, because most of that comes from point source pollution. Go and finish a minute early. But how do I know I'm making a difference? In the 1980s, when I was young, we used to find fish in our watercourses. I remember them vividly because they used to freak me out. For several years, we haven't been able to find fish. For several decades, we haven't been able to find fish. 3 or 4 years ago, we started finding fish again. That's how I'm helping biodiversity and water and the environment. And hopefully that's a bit of why I won my award. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for a very, I believe, I will try to speak English and I will do my best, for a very personal story. How are you seeing that? We have many questions. That's my proof. Very many. Excuse my clumsiness because I'm gonna try to translate them from Latvian to English.
Do you want me to put the headset on again? Do you want me to put the headset on again?
No.
You're okay?
That's okay. That's okay.
You speak better English than I speak Latvian.
Oh, well, thank you. A good one. The main question is about, well, we're going to start with the general stuff, because a lot of questions about general mindset within the farmers within the UK. Mm-hmm. Are you like an avant-garde thinking farmer? What is the general level of depression within the farms? Because, you know, we have our regulatory issues from EU, you finished the Brexit. So what's the mindset and sentiment?
It was Brexit that pushed us in this direction, really. So we are several years ahead of you but I was effectively like Martin's was 5 years ago. So when needs must, you change. But also there was an element of us already, and I am just one guy standing on the shoulders of others, getting that bit further up. I firmly believe knowledge exchange and talking to people. We as farmers are not very good at working together, but we are very good at talking to each other. And when you talk to somebody, there'll be something in there that comes back at you. And that's how you learn, and that's how you progress. So I'm not a pioneer. We were one of the first fews, but it's becoming more common, but because of money more than anything in our country.
So exchanging information. Are you part of, and how strong are your farmer organizations? And you were talking about the public relations you are doing on your own. Is this part of a bigger movement, or you are taking initiative? And what about organizations of farmers?
That in particular came about from the fact that I had kids of my own. And it's that generational thing of realizing how little their friends know about what you're doing. Your kids know, but nobody else knows. So a bit of that was, I need to educate them. But also there was a frustration there that people that didn't know what I was doing were telling me what to do. And I would throw stuff at the telly and get angry and get fed up with all people, the environmentalists, telling you how to do things. We were told to produce wheat after the wars. That's what we did. But now they want us to be more environmentally friendly. So let's work in that direction, but by educating them along the way.
We have a very interesting question here. What would be your recommendation to the EU farmers after your experience as ex-EU farmer?
We are fighting. My country is beating itself up. Half of us, you probably know, it was an almost 50-50 split. Half of us are going, yay, we're out, we're free, we can do what we like. And I'm looking at you guys with all your EU regulations going, oh, I'm glad I don't have to do all that again, and the 3 cropping rule and what have you. But also, I've shot myself in the foot because we haven't got the money coming in that we did have. So we're having to find a different way. It is very, very polarized. It's either for or against, and they are still beating themselves. Look how many prime ministers we've had in the last, last year, I think. We've had 3 or 4. We're beating ourselves up. I wouldn't be in a hurry to leave if I was you, because do you know what you're going to do when you get to the other side? There are positives about it, but we haven't sorted our country out yet. We're still fighting. We're still fighting.
So the political sustainability is as important as
natural. We're not stable. We're not politically stable. We are unsustainable as a country at the moment, and they don't want to talk about food.
Yeah.
They just don't want, they want us to rewild our whole country. That's why I'm trying to educate the kids. It's frustrating.
Here's a couple of questions about energy.
Yep.
One of the questions is, what is adaptive possibilities for the farms which has no power plants at the site?
Yep.
And the second is how you cope with the energy prices and energy crisis within the territory.
Start with that one.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had a power cut yet, but we've come very, very close to it in the UK. And every time we get close to it, they turn on a coal-fired power station. Okay. That's how they still keep 3 in our country going. But again, we don't want coal in our country. We'll rely on gas and solar and wind. But what when the sun doesn't shine and when the wind doesn't blow, what do you do then? And we haven't really quite thought that far down that line yet. So we are still a little bit fighting against it. If you don't have an AD plant or anything near, you can grow miscanthus. They will travel that a long way away. Yeah. There are a few people who have asked me the same question, and I don't know the answer because that's how I deal with my blackgrass. I walk it off the farm. But a lot of them integrate livestock and put animals on the farm. Mm-hmm. and the animals produce the muck that they can then bring back onto their own farm. So that's not really answering your question, but there isn't anything if you don't have that on your doorstep.
Anyway, you're looking for your own solutions according to your limitations.
Try and work on what you can. Very good point. Control what you can control and don't worry about what everybody else is doing, really. Work on what you can control.
Mm-hmm. Could you elaborate more on the price structure, how the prices are being fixated for grains, cannolis, everything about the price world? Yeah.
Actually, I spoke to somebody about this earlier. Maybe the same person asked the same question. The UK now is such a small fish in a big pond. We have to accept the prices we're given. We don't produce enough to go onto the world market. So often the world market has to come to us, which then means our prices are lower than everybody else's. And because we're fighting amongst ourselves, our exchange rate isn't brilliant. So we are often the poor understudy to the dollar or the euro. And our prices are always being flattened. Unfortunately, we did quite well when Mr. Putin did what Mr. Putin did. But that was the one time. That was the one time it went up. Every other time we've had it against us. And we don't specialise in stuff that other people don't either. You know, we don't grow soya in our country. We can't grow soya in our country. So protein sources are obviously quite limited to what we can. So we have to import that as well.
Okay, and the final question, because our time is going running out. The question about pests and different parasites from the living nature. How do you cope with them, mixing together this eco approach and farming?
Those pests are my beneficial pests. They eat the other pests that I'm trying to get rid of. And when you reduce your nitrogen, your plants become less sap dependent. So when you fill up a plant with nitrogen, you fill up the cell with sugar-rich environment that all your pests love to eat. And you've weakened the cell walls, the side of the plant, so all your pests can get to your plant and get to the sap, which is lovely for them. If you can control your nitrogen, you can control the pests that feed on your plants, and then you give the ones around the outside chance to move in. And if you get your soil healthy, there's other stuff in there that will help, and they will all feed on each other. So it's only positive, it's not a negative. That oilseed rape was grown without insecticides. I didn't need them because I'd got the plant into its own living form.
Thank you very much at this particular moment. Let's give a round of applause. Thank you very much to Colin Chappell. Thank you,
sir.